Hi, my name is Karen Holmes. I'm the founder and director of the World Peace Organization for the One World Government. We're at a very important time in the evolution of mankind and the evolution of where we are as a planet. Okay, we're in a situation where, as I've said before, the Iraq War started a series of cycles where the oppression of the invasion of Iraq started. It was a hostile takeover of the United States did on Iraq. We're in a period now where hostile takeovers are possible. There've always been hostile takeovers on an individual basis, but now we're on a global scale. When there were no weapons of mass destruction found, it collapsed the U.S. power base, and other nations are jockeying to see who's going to become the next superpower. So we have Russia moving in, playing the same power games they played to create the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. We have China doing its push to control natural resources and to control, like, the Silk Road idea. Okay, where the traditional games are being replayed over and over and over again. The United States, we say we're a democracy and we're going to democratize everybody. But then these same games, power games, are so important to the player that they don't want to let them go. They'll resist. If you are playing the power game of being an alcoholic, you're not going to let go of alcoholism, and it's based on fear. So a lot of countries have reached the point where they're neutral, but even neutrality is a power game, you could say. Okay, so we've reached the point in our evolution where we are deciding what our future is going to be. Is it going to be another period of imperialism? Is there going to be an emperor at the end of this, where one country is going to be at the top and controlling everybody else? I don't think anybody's in agreement with that. There's nobody who believes that Putin should be the emperor of the planet, the czar of the world, taking over all these little countries. The United States, we have people all over. We've taken over countries too, other lands. How did we get Hawaii? How did we get Guam and all the countries in the Micronesia area of there? So we have a presence to control things. That time period is over because it's reached its ultimate conclusion. And the reason is because right now, instead of taking over a little tiny island in the middle of the Pacific, like Hawaii, and making it a territory and then a state, or what happened to Guam, for example, and it's being a military base and things like that, making an agreement with the people there, like an economic takeover, you could say, of a country and a culture, making it possible for people to function on a higher level, and possibly, we're kind of at a point where we have to decide what we're going to do. So we're talking now about, you could say, the hostile takeover of the United States. When Donald Trump got into office, there's talking now about his friendship with Putin, his connections with that meeting in the Oval Office with the ambassador from Russia and the foreign to the United States, and the foreign minister coming and talking, and Donald Trump allowed the Russian media to come in, but not the U.S. media to come in and watch this historic event, you could say. The Helsinki thing where he said, I don't know why Russia would do that or whatever. We're right at a point now where Donald Trump has opened the country up to Russia, and they're Russian sympathizers now. So you could say that we're kind of like the potential for us being the next Ukraine is there. The president of Poland is saying that once Ukraine falls, Poland is next, but not necessarily. They can come after the United States and control us, and they're trying to do that. So we're now in a situation where we are the next Ukraine, you could say, by supporting that Ukraine militarily. That was one way to do it, but probably a better way to do it would be to say we support the creation of the international government where disputes will be settled in court rather than the battlefield, and the monies wasted on war will go to the people. So what happens if they hold a war and nobody shows up? Because world peace is here. That idea is where we're now transitioning to it. It's like you can go along saying, well, there are always going to be wars or something, but what happens when the war is going to be here? George Bush said, we'll fight them over there so we don't have to fight them here. What happens if we're going to fight them here next? How many people? Okay, so then does it matter because you've got an AR-15? Does it matter? Okay, how about if, like I said, we cannot defend ourselves from those four military weapons that the Russia has. So if we have Russia and China against us, one going economically against us, and the other one, so the United States is showing, the other one is military. What happens if the United States now our government is trying desperately to figure out how to defend the United States by sending up spy satellites, by trying to get hypersonic missiles, but Russia is already ahead of us because of the plan for world peace. Are we going to go for it or are we going to not go for it? If it was opened up to debate by Barack Obama and the Republicans didn't like the idea, we're going to consider now. So maybe that undermined the security of the United States when a plan for world peace was introduced and opened up to debate, and people move forward too fast to try and, we can pull our troops home or whatever. So now, the reason I'm bringing this up now is because we have to set up a place where we're not, let's say my organization, I am not functioning as an American. I'm functioning as a citizen of the world. I'm functioning as one individual, a citizen of the world. They're talking about globalism. We don't want globalism. We're going to build that wall around us. Now, if Donald Trump wanted to build a wall around us, but then he had already allowed the wolf, you could say, to come in, but we're going to keep the Hispanic people out, down at the border, keep immigrants out. It's kind of like that doesn't make sense to have one but not the other. Okay, so what we're doing right now is we're looking at my organization. The idea has gone out. People in 87 countries like the idea. Okay, it's like people are standing up and saying, I want world peace. We can add it now. This plan is a viable plan. Okay, so now we have to take the next step. I've been, a friend of mine and I'm not so sure I can call him a friend right now, because nobody really has any friends anymore. And that's a sad thing to say, but let's say that friendship is different, because let's say when Donald Trump said Vladimir Putin is his friend, how do you know that Vladimir Putin is actually a friend? What is the definition of a friend? Is the friend the person who is going to make a win-win agreement with you? Or is that person going to figure out how to control and manipulate you so that he or she can get what they want? Okay, so we're at a point in our evolution where we have to redefine friends, and we don't know who our friends are. Who are our friends? If Donald Trump is the president of the United States, can Vladimir Putin be his friend? So what we have to do is we have to step back, and we have to look at our country as who we are. Russia has to look at their country. China has to look at their country and their interests. But at the same time, we still have to function globally. We cannot be self-sufficient as a family without interacting with everybody else. So we have to redefine what friendship is. That is something that when you don't have secure walls, if you don't have a castle around you with a moat and the big walls, you have to figure out how to have a sense of conflict resolution. You have to be able to defend yourself, but how do you do it when you don't have any structure set into place to do it? So that's what Stonehenge was. Stonehenge was a place for conflict resolution. The reason it was built, you could say, was, Stonehenge goes back, let's say, 5,000 years. It spans a period of time. But 15,000 years ago, there were other continents, you could say, the lost continent of Atlantis and such. And they had technology where they were able to, laser technology that had been given to them by the aliens, and we'll talk about how the aliens have also been doing a hostile takeover. That is the war in heaven, is the hostile takeover of our planet by certain aliens. There are certain aliens who are working one-on-one with us as win-win agreements, and they're the other ones that are, you could say, they're not only our friends, they are people who are working with us. Then there are the aliens who are doing a hostile takeover. And if our government gets a connection to an alien who comes in, the same thing happens over and over and over again. How about Native Americans as the white people are moving west? Was that a hostile takeover of their lands? It's a hostile takeover. How about the imperialism and the taking over when the kings and queens of England, or of Europe, were taking over the colonies and taking over part of Africa because they wanted all those jewels. You look at the Queen of England and all the fancy jewels she has, they had to come from someplace. Okay? So we're looking at hostile takeovers, and now that the United States is facing a hostile takeover, we have to figure out how they happen and why they happen and who our friends are and who our friends aren't. Who are we going to invite into our country? Are we going to leave out all the Mexicans and the people from Central America because we don't like them, but we do like Russia? Or are we going to invite the people in from Mexico because of our history with them and coming up into New Mexico and Arizona and California and the mission trail that they had, the Santa Fe Trail and such? So but then we're a melting pot of countries, of different cultures, and my family came here. My ancestors came from Poland. I'm Eastern. You could say I'm Eastern European, so a descent. So what happens? Are we being invaded by Poland because my ancestors came here? When we're a melting pot, we are also opening up ourselves to the idea of this and who our friends are and how we can trust them and how we don't trust certain people from Central America, and they're going, they have the right to be here, but what happens if the Russians have come in too and they have the right to be here, but whose loyalty? And that happened in Japan. with the Japanese who had come here from in Oregon in this area, California. There were internment camps for the Japanese during World War II, where people lost their land and they were put into concentration camps, you could say, in the United States on the West Coast because of their fear that they were spies. In fact, I had two elderly aunts during World War II. I'm Polish and German. Two of my great aunts were spies who went back to find out they were spies during World War II. They went back to Germany. They could speak German perfectly, and they went back. Two little old ladies who went back and were part of the defense of the United States. That's something that they don't talk about too much in my family, but I figure after all these years, everybody's long gone, so what difference does it make? So now what we have is a structure that's set in place that allows everybody, that's being debated, that allows everybody to be part of this. This friend of mine that I was telling you about, he and I sat down one time and we were talking about Oxford and Stonehenge because his family came from that area of England, and he had memories of that, and of that time, let's say racial memories of that time and the connection that we had to that. I have memories too of things that happened in Atlantis, things that happened and that allow me to understand things. So now what we have is Donald Trump. The issue is, what did Donald Trump do with the papers, the sensitive papers that were there? Has Russia moved in, and is Russia influencing? We have to get along with Russia. They are our friends. They are our friends. But are they our friends? Okay, so let's say that nobody has any friends right now, and let's just say that we have to defend ourselves, but we cannot do it militarily, because what happens when the other side has stronger weapons than you do? We still have a lot of influence in the world, but we cannot fight a global war against the United States. We cannot fight if Russia and China have infiltrated into Africa and into South America, and they're controlling people in the government, like the rise of authoritarianism. The Russia and China have nearly taken over the world at this point in time. But they cannot take over the idea of the plan for the international government. But they've been trying to do that. As my friend and I sat down together, we figured out that the archaeological evidence that's there to prove our theory about the rivers and how they run in, there's like a continental divide, an island divide, a continental divide, where one river runs to the west and one river runs to the south, and the kings would come up the rivers and as they were coming, they were feasted at a certain place. So let's say two kings are there, and they are having a dispute, and the dispute is decimating their people, making it possible. If you decimate two kings fight and they decimate each other, it makes it possible for a third entity to come in. Isn't that what happened? In the United States, we have a civil war going on. Isn't that what they're saying? Between the Democrats and the Republicans. Well, what happens if Donald Trump wants to run again, and he's inviting the Russians in? He invited in his people. He wove an illusion, told his grand lies, brought in a bunch of people, and then now he's working to get it again by allowing the Russians to come in and to control Biden and that. So this is what happened in the last conflict that was handled in Stonehenge. Stonehenge, if you look at it, was vandalized. It was there were 5 doors, you could say, 5 portals. There's the outside henge, and that was like a mound, and that was a place where the archers stood. You know the historical story about William Tell and the archers, the Welsh archers, and the longbows that they had. Well, they were pretty strong bows that they made. Those longbows were a very powerful weapon. And by putting the archers around, standing on that henge, they were shooting down. They could shoot down into it. So let's say you had 2 kings coming, and they had been at war, and there are two men or women. They were women who were, and they were fighting each other. So over who would be, they had lots of little kings, and then the story of King Arthur with bringing together all the kings at the round table. So isn't that kind of where we are now with Arthur and the king? But then so we have all these myths and all these legends that are occurring that allow us to understand the history of where people were at the time. When they got together there at Stonehenge, the first part of Stonehenge was posts in the ground, and they got together, and one side they would stand next to the posts, and they were not allowed to move, and they would yell at each other, and they would expend all their energy, all their anger. One side would yell, and then the other side would yell. Isn't that kind of what they've done, trying to create a sense of energy? And then they would sacrifice somebody. The idea of sacrificing somebody would dissipate the energy. That's why assassinations, you could say, occur, is to dissipate the energy. If somebody is assassinated, to dissipate the energy that's rising in the tensions, wouldn't you say that they would take an innocent person and sacrifice them, and then everybody would have to sit back and go, oh man, what have I done? What am I doing? I'm going to have to rethink this. If my conflict is causing problems here, we're going to have to deal with this. So what happened was those 5 portals then were established with the idea that they were going to talk about each of these ideas, and that's you could say the world peace marketing strategy. You have a doorway for the people who stand on the principles, and a doorway for the people who are into power, and a doorway for the people whose lives are affected, and the doorway for the people whose function for their own interests. Okay, so the conflict is happening, and then the 5, but that's only 4. But the middle one was for the children. That was for the children being affected, being dragged into conflict. And when it's in a forever war, you just keep dragging the children in, and the next generation doesn't have a clue over what, other than what has been told to them about this. So a forever war, you could say, brings in the children, and now so that the people at Stonehenge were learning about conflict resolution, because there had been a hostile takeover in Atlantis with this technology that went through the planet and ripped apart the earth. The great rift that occurred in Africa is probably what shifted the population to head out. The big conflict moved people into the northern countries. When there's an ice age going on or whatever, that is not necessarily where you want to go if you like it nice and warm and there's food all over the place. You can just pick it off the trees. Okay, so what we have now is we have Stonehenge. Stonehenge has been, each stage of Stonehenge was the first idea. There had to be explaining to people how it works and why it doesn't work. And so these 5 doors, you could say this is the children. So the 2 posts, the 2 doors that were vandalized were the one for the children and the one for the people who function for their own interests. You could say the last stage, this was the idea of the pearly gates of heaven, where people could create the life they want. But the people didn't want it to happen, and they would rather see the hostile takeover of England and all that lucrative, the wealth that was coming in from the kings and queens who had gone there to end the disputes. So you could say it was a giant peach or giant plum ready to be plucked because there was no sense of security. Okay, they couldn't deal with security. They just buried all their stuff in the ground, and farmers keep digging up the wealth. You find this trove of all these beautiful golden artifacts or something. How did that farmer get that? Was it some king coming through there and digging, putting it down, and then not coming back? No, the kings would come, and then they would pay the farmers and pay the people at Stonehenge for their services, and then the people at Stonehenge paid the people, like the hunters and the gatherers from other tribes who came there to support the feast with boars. They would raise them or hunt them or whatever, and then supply the kings for the feasts that they would have at Woodhenge. Okay, so now what we have here, my friend and I have been sending this same information to the people in England, and we would like to see Stonehenge to go from the idea of a single lump of stones that as people see as they're driving by, or they have their solstice parties or whatever, equinox parties, and so I found this at the store, and I bought this. Stonehenge is much bigger than anybody has imagined. It's a whole venue, and when you look at the archaeological setup, and the astrological setup too, astronomical setup, where they're looking at the holy days, keeping track of the equinoxes and the time, because those are the times when the energy is the highest. You could say it's all concentrated at that one point as it's coming up. They're looking at the days, so when the energy is the highest, when they can bring about change at the beginning or the end of a cycle. Stonehenge, there are people who would like to see the 303A go on, and why would anybody want to stop at Stonehenge when it's just a pile of rocks? It's a huge venue that was used thousands of years ago to end conflicts. Well, England is looking for a Brexit economy. How are they going to get their economy back again? The way to do it is to focus, instead of focus on London as being the main powerhouse of their economy, they should be looking at Stonehenge being the main focus of their economy, and then step back. And that's probably why Vladimir Putin threatened to wipe Stonehenge off the face of the planet with their torpedoes. Let's just nuke England because we don't want them to interfere in our hostile takeover of the world. I don't know about you, but I'm not in agreement with Russia becoming the next superpower with the way they treat people and their rights. So we're looking at rights, we're looking at unalienable rights, and we're looking at the fact that nobody's really in agreement for Russia taking over. I'm not the only person who's there. But now I have to, if I'm standing up and protesting that I don't want Russia to take over the United States or the entire world, and I don't want China to take over the world, if they want to do their Silk Road, there's a better way to do it. And if Russia wants to become a superpower rather than a their culture has not, it's been based on hostile takeovers of the different, you could say, the different stands, the Tajikistan and Kazakhstan and the Afghanistan, trying to take over that area, the stands, and the Baltic Sea, trying to deal with that, the different cultures associated with all the different tribes and things like that, and why Finland and Sweden are kind of worried about that now, because they're right across that. When the Baltic Sea. Now, what I'm doing right here is I'm separating out the people who are trying to get rid of globalism. Yeah, no, we can't do that because we're still part of it. We still have to have. They don't have to be our friends, but we can create trade agreements, win-win trade agreements for what we want, instead of taking over the Democratic Republic of Congo because they have nuclear weapons and they have coltan, which is needed for cell phones, and the Africa is the third world countries, you could say, are they're giant plums ready to be plucked because with their government that has finally reached the point where it's a nation rather than a bunch of small tribes of people. It's a nation, and they have their natural resources and then if they're an oligarch of the diamond oligarch, you could say, that has been used for funding the genocide in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. What you have is to supply weapons, blood diamonds. Instead of doing that, the better way to do it is to make win-win agreements which build trust and set the stage for future agreements. So instead of inviting Russia in to take over the NRA, for example, and make sure that there's a civil war, if there's a civil war, we're going to win it, okay? The better way to do that is to make win-win agreements which build trust and set the stage for future agreements. So right now, there's this plan, this idea for the international government that is an amorphous shape right now. But at some point in time, Putin, he has to remember he's mortal. If he's causing trouble, there's always the possibility that something is going to happen. And I'm not advising anything. I don't believe in assassination, but that is something where when people realize that what they're doing isn't working and that nobody's in agreement with it, that people are standing up in protest, then you have to have a plan that benefits everyone, and that is the plan for the international government, because it's based on win-win agreements. And if China wants to be this powerhouse of economics in the international government, it's based on population. So China has this huge population now, and technically speaking, they would have more power in the House of Representatives because based on the will of the people, because this is the same argument that our founding fathers had, because if you take all these states, and some are densely populated and some are very sparsely populated, like Wyoming has the same 500,000 people, has the same number of senators because in their state as California and New York, which are very densely populated. At least the southern part of California, is densely populated but they still have, because in the House of Representatives it's based on population, And each state has the same number of senators because they're representing the rights of the people. That's why our Congress is set up the way it is. The rights of the people are respected and the will of the people are respected. But our senators have some of our senators have forgotten that they're supposed to be defending the rights of their people, representing the rights of the people, because they've now been grabbing for power. Okay, so now Stonehenge is now the next England. The focus is on England now, and the idea of what about Brexit? How are they going to build their economy based on their tradition of conflict resolution and unification, because the sun never sets on the British Empire? Okay, that's where we are right now, is we're going to look at how Russia and China have taken their old ideas of power of conquest, and they're just going to push to the next level. But England and the United States are going to come together, like Tony Blair and George W. Bush went into Iraq and did a hostile takeover of Iraq, and now it's time to settle this dispute of England in court rather than the battlefield, so that the monies that are wasted on war can go to the people instead. So we're introducing this new idea of an international legal system that allows all the people to be unified, and that is, we're all subject to universal law. The basis, when I sent my letter to the Supreme Court, that introduced into the U.S. legal system the idea that we're all subject to universal law. Donald Trump has been, you could say, tyrannical. That means unstoppable. It's like he's above the law. But nobody's above the law, the universal law. Everybody is subject to the law. Everybody, they say, like Merrick Garland says, nobody's above the law. Nobody's above the law. And so when we look at that is what we're looking about, is nobody's above universal law. There's always, when we break universal law, there's always a backlash to it. No matter whether you are a Republican, a Democrat, a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Jew, a Taoist, a Confucianist, it doesn't matter. Everybody has been exposed, for world peace to come, everybody had to be exposed to universal law. And now it has happened. It's karma, it's universal law of do unto others, is as you reap, so shall you sow. As you sow, so shall you reap. I always get that backwards. How about the golden rule? How many people have heard about the golden rule? Oh, that's something you teach to kindergartners. The grown-ups don't do that. Yeah, grown-ups do that. We're all subject to universal law because what you do to somebody else will be done to you. When the United States, when George W. Bush and Tony Blair attacked Iraq and no weapons of mass destruction were found, it backlashed on them because the games continue on until an innocent person is sacrificed. Like when they sacrifice the person on the sacrifice stone at Stonehenge. The bodies of they find people, the bodies there have been buried with wealth. And it's because to end the conflict, they took one person, sacrificed him. And then they had to stop and think. So this is where we are right now, is we are at a point where all of these, where Stonehenge is reaching its end, when it's become nothing but a monument, and the people are trying to put that 303A road through there so that everybody can zoom as fast as they can to London. Wouldn't it be time to take for England if they refuse to listen to that idea? If they refuse to go along with it, if they're going to try and fight Putin, and the threat about the torpedoes going after this. The best way is for everybody, instead of allowing Stonehenge to go back into the history and be forgotten, like what they're trying to do with the Iraq War. Let's just let that fade into history. We've already resolved that. Let's just go. And on his first trip to the CIA, Donald Trump said, he coded the agents there. He gave a speech, and he said that his intent was to go back into Iraq and to take their oil, because after all, to the victors go the spoils. But we didn't win a war in Iraq. We just left a really big embassy there, and it became like a castle there with big walls and concrete and defensive. It's defensive. It's not opening that says, come in and find out what our culture is, because they already know what our culture is. So they had to put these walls around it. Okay, and Donald Trump talking about that, he said, he tells the story. He said, when you picked me up about the rattlesnake, the Native American and the rattlesnake, he says, when you picked me up, you knew who I was. So don't blame me for biting you. Okay, so many people knew who he was and didn't want to pick him up. So now what we have is we have a hostile takeover of the United States occurring, a hostile takeover of England. Sweden and Finland are worried. So now the next step is, to the point where they join NATO, so the next step we're looking at now is how to set up Oxford and Stonehenge. And that is, you could say, is to understand that there's five doors, portals, and everybody has the right to create the life they want, but they just don't know how to do it. If you stand on the principles, this portal is for you. If you are power, if you're grabbing for power, this portal is for you. If your life has been affected, let's say the soldiers who were there, they would like to stay home and with their families and run their farm or whatever. They don't necessarily want to be in war. And then the people who function for their own interests. We now have the pearly gates to heaven on earth forming again. And now what we have to do is, and then these are our children, we have to think about the future. And people who function for their own interests really don't think about the future. So when, like you said, that's the future. So let's just redo that, put that right here. This is the children, okay? People, principles, power, life, and function for their own interests. So we're looking at it possible. The world peace marketing strategy allows everybody to create the life they want. If you are at Stonehenge and you are standing on principles, they would take the people through that portal, through that doorway, and then they would go and they would have classes, and they would explain to them how they could get their life. After that sacrifice occurred, the energy would rise up, sacrifice would happen, they would bury the person, they would go off and have a ceremony and bury the person, and their death was there, their sacrifice was there to end the conflict. And then they would take them through the doors and they would teach them about that. But then what they had to do, that the next walls around it were designed to be like a classroom where everybody would stand together to unify. They had to unify people first. There was conflict resolution and unification. Like I said, the sun always never sets on the British Empire, you could say, but now that's kind of ending as the different members of the Commonwealth move off and they've lost slave colonies and things like that. So now what we have to do is we're building this idea, this structure of Stonehenge again, where it can handle the idea of conflict resolution and unification. Oxford is going to help us with the idea of the grand unification principle, or the unified field theory. We're going to be talking about conflict resolution and unification, which are opposite sides of that idea of world peace. You have an idea, you have a plan, and then on the opposite side of it, you have to deal with conflict resolution and the security issues of it. Because what's happening right now is that the idea has been introduced, but to make it a plan, we have to also deal with conflict resolution. And we've reached the point now where how many people are really in agreement with Russia taking over the world? Unification of that. We have to deal with universal law, God's law, that applies to every atom in the universe. And that's my letter to the Supreme Court, introducing it into the idea. So we have people now who've been resisting the idea of the creation of an international government, but without understanding that, hey, the United States cannot fight a global war. And I'll tell you what, if it's a civil war now within the United States, between the Russians, or not the Russians, between the Democrats and the Republicans, it's not a civil war, it's a genocide that's going on here. And if we destroy ourselves by genocide, which is what is devolving, what happens is Russia will move in and take over the United States, and China and Russia will meet in the middle, you could say, and they'll control the whole world. So it's time for us to start thinking about unification and conflict resolution. And now I ask that you like, share, and subscribe, because that's what's happening right now. Okay, so now what we have is a solution that everybody will agree to. Our organization has members in 87 countries who like the plan for world peace. Our plan has passed cultural review. So let's say this, we have what is the plan that everybody will agree to? Okay, Russia taking over the world, China taking over the world, becoming the next economic superpower based on economics, in Russia kind of coming together, and it's Asia's century to shine, and the rest of us are just going to be their slaves. They're going to take over, but then they'll have the oligarchs, which are the people who are supporting them and opening the door to them to come in. Isn't that what's happening in, let's say, Venezuela, that area? Why people are talking about that? They're trying to defend themselves from people moving in. The BRIC countries, so what we have is groups of people who've come together, because they're friends, they're making win-win agreements. How about Cuba, and allowing the friendship, the blockade during the time of early 60s with Cuban Missile Crisis, that allowed Russia to kind of move into there because of friends. There are friends. Nobody has any friends now because friends, I'm your friend. Isn't that kind of what they do with pedophiles taking control of kids? I'm your friend. I'm nice to you. That person, your parent, is not nice to you. Isn't that kind of how it works? People moving in and saying, we got to get rid of Biden, we're going to get rid of him, we're going to wipe him out, we're going to get everybody together, and that's what happened to the last conflict that was resolved at Stonehenge. Okay, that led to the end of it. So if we invite Russia in, and we've turned over our resources to China, we have to start doing things a lot smarter than we did. We don't have friends. We don't have allies. We have to function for our own interests, but they don't have friends either. And now NATO is great, but it's not strong enough to handle that idea, because we've got all of South America and Africa that have been being controlled and by the resources of going into China, which has led to Darfur. Okay, do we want Darfur here? No. So I ask that you like, share, and subscribe, and understand that universal law, there are two things that unify the world. One is universal law. We're all subject to God's law of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because what you do to others will be done to you. And the one thing that everyone wants is to be able to create the life they want, and they don't know how to do it. Okay? So now, what we want right now is conflict resolution and unification. We're all Americans. If you look at the earth from out in space, there are no borders. There are no boundaries. We're all citizens of the universe. We're all, and we'll go into that later with the alien idea, because we are reintegrating our alien part of self. Oh man. Okay, and then, yeah, that's going to be even more interesting than this one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about unification and conflict resolution. That's where we are now. Look at our conflict resolution brochures. Think about Oxford and Stonehenge, and how by helping England get their economy based on that idea of their past, but a higher level of it, then maybe Russia and China and the United States can do the same thing, functioning on a higher level by making win-win agreements to get what they want rather than hostile takeovers. Okay, that's enough for today. I've talked too long the way it is. Thank you.